Welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where I want to think more deeply with you about Christian faith and life. I have a personal confession. I'm on about 4 solid days of listening to Men at Work on Spotify. When I was in college, Men at Work had 4 or 5 hits. They were huge. They came from a land down under in Australia. They sold over 30 million albums. They were the most famous band in the world for about 8 months. And the music's fairly innocuous. It's catchy. They used the saxophone, different instruments they'd mix in. The lead singer had a unique voice, and it brings back many memories for me. It's been quite the trip down memory lane. Hey, you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and you think I'm a believer's welcome. Welcome to the show. Thanks for downloading today's thought piece. This is episode 8 in my Faith versus Reason debate, schism series. Before I go further, I just have to ask you, do you think the Bible is just a nice story? Do you think that the Bible was written just to entertain ancient Mediterranean types? What if instead of dismissing the Bible as an ancient and irrelevant document, what if you began to allow it to shape your reality, to shape the way you process reality? What if? What if it were more than just a dusty old book? In previous episodes, we looked at the historic Western societal root of and for doubt, the different things Descartes and his worldview did to our perception of reality, the fact that all knowledge involves commitment and risk and trust, and especially about the important matters of life. Knowledge involves serious commitment and risk and trust, and that's true even for scientists. In fact, I've argued following the philosophy of Michael Polanyi that it is just a myth that science is objective. And that's because scientists have their biases, commitments, hopes, and aspirations, and all of that shapes what they do. Scientists, whether they will admit it or not, have tremendous faith in what they do and in that they do. And in all of that, they're rather religious. Religions are ways of life that involve everything. Scientists have a way of life that involves their everything. Similarly, religious people have their biases and commitments and hopes and goals and aspirations, and all that shapes what they do. My point? All of human life involves faith. Religion? Yes, but even science, too. We thought together in my last episode about whether all doubt is devilish or destructive or evil, and sometimes it is, but not always. The Holy Spirit sometimes stirs us up with doubt precisely so we will dig deeper. The Holy Spirit puts a question or an unease, a concern or a bug in our being, just so that we will go and do some serious probing. Why would He do that? He wants to be known, and He wants to be known deeply. He wants to be known in the holiness and beauty and love that characterizes Him. But if we simply assume He is easily graspable, easily tamed by our own mental or emotional constructs, and today it's far more often the case that we seize upon certain perceptions about God because they are emotionally satisfying to us. If we do that, we will miss the depths, the beauties, the treasures, the mysterious peace that He Himself is, glorious, majestic God. Jesus of Nazareth, you amazing Prince, you. In short, my previous episode sought to establish that all of life is grounded in faith, which, once you recognize that, admit that, see the pretty basic logic of that, it makes religious faith far more serious, far more plausible than our rather arrogant Western societal view would now have it. Now, majorities can be wrong. right? All we have to do is think about statewide or national elections, right? We know, no matter what side of the political divide that you find yourself on, that majorities can be wrong. Nevertheless, I want to posit to you again to show the situation of our own Western contemporary worldview or mood or attitude. I want to posit that the human race has always been convinced about religious truth. Our last 300 years of Western doubt and cynicism are exceptional for the many millennia-long existence of humanity. Unless we arrogantly think, and apparently millions do, that we today are the epitome of what it means to be human, unless we pridefully think that the entire human race was formerly a bunch of caveman-dwelling ignoramuses, then we should see that religious faith has characterized human existence ever since people existed. And by the way, to define religion is a hard word to define, but I will, for this episode, simply denote religion as our common human belief in transcendence. The human race certainly has not always been monotheistic, but there is a global sense of awareness that something more is there. Even though we are humus, which is Latin for of the dirt, even though we are humus, we know there's something fascinating about humanity. We know there's something soulish about ourselves, spiritual, powerful, imaginative, sweeping, healing, poisonous, beautiful, and ugly all at once about what it means to be a human. We are of the dirt, but there just seems to be so much dad-burn more going on than mere humus. There's a something more at work, a something more present than mere materiality or mere logical cause and effect. Whether it has involved worship of the sun or veneration of the male and female sexual body parts, or worship of nature, or worship of the oceans or volcanoes, the whole global family of humans have lived their entire lives aware that something, variously understood, is present and at work. We know that there is a transcendent something or power or being that is there, even if we don't always know what to call it or how to worship it or how to placate it or manipulate it or how to tap into its presence in our daily lives. What this means for me is that in significant ways to be human is to be religious. Paul Tillich, a 20th century theologian of culture, said that religion is the defining element of any culture. And today we would add, even when that culture is irreligious or a-religious, they're still religious. Because to be a non-believer, to not believe in transcendence, is for some as passionate a calling and is involving as much evangelism as, say, a committed Southern Baptist. People can be very religious about their non-religion. But no, a Buddhist believes that something there is ultimately at work. That work is a nothing, but that work is a something. A faithful Muslim believes she can know nothing about the mind of Allah, but she truly knows that a divine someone real is at work in and through the universe. A believing Jew, and percentage-wise there are actually very few, a believing Jew knows that the unnameable God, the same God who created the universe by his mere speaking, is nevertheless concerned with his creation. Christians? We know God, with all his being, loves his creation and only wants healing for his creation. And for all our differences, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, and Christians, we all know something more is there. The universe just isn't only a matter of chemicals and energy and electricity and gravity all interacting with non-being. And finally, by way of my rapturous introduction today, if we people are only a matter of chemicals and energy and electricity all interacting with itself, then why do you believe anyone? Why do you believe you? Why do you trust anyone's reason? After all, it's just electricity running through squishy, mushy brain matter. No, be honest with yourself. You know deep down in your gut that more is going on than can easily be put into words. Well then, what do we do with faith and reason? If faith and reason are both really real and in the world of everyday reality for 6 or 7 billion of us, how should we conceive their relationship? Which should be prior, faith or reason? Well, if reason is prior, then we have posited ourselves as the arbiter of all reality. If reason is prior, then we might as well call ourselves God, and some people do. If reason is prior in that relationship, then we might as well just worship ourselves, and I'm watching hundreds of millions of people on the planet pretty much do just that. No, the church, the community that worships the resurrected Jew, the church has said for some 2,000 years, reason comes after faith. I already suggested in earlier episodes, but it's not only true for religious faith, it's true for all of life. Faith is prior to reason. Faith enables reason. And that's true for all linguistic construction. So instead, the church has said together, let's put reason in the service of faith. Let's not pit them against one another as enemies. Let's not chain faith in servitude to reason. Let's see them both as gifts from God. And since God is a God who speaks truth to us, let's put reason into the service, into the service of faith. Let's not do that in a slave-like, don't ask any questions about the universe manner. Let's not do that in a slavish, don't ask any questions about religious faith manner. But let's do that rather in a, well, we've settled on the faith that there's a God, a Redeemer, a Messiah, an afterlife, as well as a series of values and practices and behaviors that honor that God, and then let's go forward. Or let's do that in a come, let us reason together manner of Isaiah. Oh, truly, come, let us reason together. Please let's stop yelling at each other. Would it be wrong if I yelled that at you right now? Stop yelling at each other. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted with watching and hearing people and seeing people harangue one another on social media. I'm exhausted with hearing them yell at one another. Where's the reason? Where's the charity? Where's the let's sit down and right up front in an attitude of mutual respect, agree to disagree? Dennis Prager, whom I've listened to and learned from for something like 30 years, has an adage. He says, I'm less interested in agreement than in understanding. I prefer clarity over agreement. And for me, the Uncensored Unprofessor, I say to Prager, amen. Let's find clarity. Let's think together. Let's reason together. Let's find mutual clarity. Tell me why you take the position and the values you do. But I don't believe it's going to help your cause to shout me down before we've even spoken together and tell me that I'm a hater. For me, the you, during my professional years, I had a mantra. Questions lead to answers. I wanted my students asking questions. If they sat in class like lumps, if their body was present but their mind was somewhere else, if they believed without thinking and processing or believed everything any professor said to them, I would be disappointed in their critical abilities. So for this show and for my entire podcast, I want to encourage critical thinking, not cynical thinking. And I want to modify my earlier adage, questions lead to answers, to good questions lead to good answers, because it's often true. Good questions lead to good answers. Don't be like a backyard cook I once heard about. Maybe you read about this guy in the news. Supposedly, a new parachutist had just jumped from the plane at 10,000 feet and soon discovered that all his lines were hopelessly tangled. At about 5,000 feet, still struggling, he noticed someone coming up from the ground at about the same speed as he was going toward the ground. And as they passed each other at 3,000 feet, the shootist yells, "Hey, do you know anything about parachutes?" The reply came fading toward the end, "No, do you know anything about propane stoves?" Hey, turn your phone off for about 30 minutes this evening and read a book by Tim Keller. Turn your computer off for an hour this weekend and read a meaningful book. Turn off the television tonight and read a book by Os Guinness for 20 minutes. There are so many engaging Christian thinkers and writers who will help fill your sails, help build you up, help expand your Christian imagination. Find a thoughtful friend who will think through with you what you're reading, or when you're with your thoughtful friend, don't simply move to share your own feelings and opinions. Don't pool your ignorance. I have a quick aside on this. When I was a college undergrad and then later even as a PhD student, I utterly detested it when the professor would have us split up in groups to discuss things. Because too often the person who spoke the most in the group had actually not done the required reading and didn't really have an informed understanding of the matter. Too often the small group breakout sessions were sadly the sharing of our collective ignorance. And even more, I wasn't paying big money to learn from my classmates. I had chosen that specific class to learn from that professor, presumably an expert in the field. Oh, and as I'm thinking about it, that recalls another story I experienced, only this time as a professor. I had delivered some apparently engaging lecture in a general ed class, so that afterward, two women came up to me and said, "Hey, professor, we really enjoyed today's lecture and we want to think more with you. Maybe we could ask you some further questions to go deeper on this topic?" Well, of course, I said. I was happy. So we arranged a coffee conflab for a few days later at the Gypsy Den in Costa Mesa, and the three of us sat down with our lattes. Then, after some polite chit-chat, one of them asked me a question about the lecture she had found intriguing. The other woman proceeded to say, "Yeah, it's kind of like such and such." And for the next 45 minutes, I sat there listening to the two of them share their opinions and feelings. It was rather remarkable. I not only felt like an outsider to the conversation to which they had invited me, I realized then and there that in our season of history, we just love to emote. We really love to share our opinions without even realizing that maybe we haven't done any serious investigation into the matter that's in front of us. It was an eye-opening experience for me on several levels. Anyway, back to my larger point. Try to really understand what that good Christian thinker you're reading is saying. Find some clarity on her or his thought, even if in the end you disagree. Understand first, then critique. Understand, then make criticism. But understand first. The church, for all of the silly propaganda to the contrary, is not afraid of science or reason or human intellect. In fact, the church has been making reasoned defenses of the faith for 2,000 years. In seminal ways, it was the reasoned logic of Christian faith that brought down the animistic and polytheistic Roman religions. Well, reason along with a lifestyle and peace and meaning and eternal significance and beauty and hope, the list gets longer. But it's also the case in truly significant ways that it was the church who first started universities in the 11th centuries at Oxford and Bologna. And it was universities that, in substantial ways, eventually led science and medicine to arise as we now have them. And that's a whole fascinating matter to consider in future episodes. Reason can function and can function beautifully in the service of faith. But this means there's a primacy to faith. Sorry to be so repetitive, but something is prior. Something regulates the order of your life. Something is foundational. Something is established as preeminent in your being. If reason is king over faith, you'll create some problems for yourself as a believer. And again, for the dozenth time, is dozenth a word? I like making up words. For the dozenth time, I'm not talking about blind faith. I'm not talking about faith in faith. Or, here, let's parse this differently. Maybe a different frame will help make my point. Aristotle, and then 8 centuries after him, Augustine, both reasoned that we are, as human beings, what we love. We are what we love. We are less defined by what we think, and man is our thinking, our self-talk so critical. We are less defined by what we think than by what we love. Or one guy I know about said, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." We fleshly creatures with souls tend to live less by our informed reason and more by what we want to get out of life. We tend to spend our time doing the things that we want to do. You want to know where your heart is? Examine what you do with your free time. So, thinking epistemologically with me, thinking with me today about how it is that we structure our knowing, we tend to do all of that based on our loves. The scriptures say, men love darkness because their deeds are evil. That's because our doing reflects our loving. Evil deeds follow a dark heart. What we love emerges in what we do. What we love appears regularly in the way we spend our time and orient our lives. So, for instance, we can say we love Jesus, but if we haven't invited him into our minds, it's possible that we haven't really made him to be our Lord. We can say we're a Christian, but if we process reality and evaluate reality and value reality just like all the non-Christians around us, then it's fair to wonder whether we are really Christian in the way the Bible invites us to be believers. What's my point again? Faith comes first. This means that faith places claims not only upon our hearts, as evangelicals would normally say it, but also upon our knowing. Faith places claims upon our knowing. Let me give you a couple foundational examples of that. First, because of Christian faith, we treat and are called to treat all people with respect. The Bible teaches that because we're all created in God's image, right, in Latin imago Dei, because we're all created in God's image, we are to deal with one another using mutuality and humility and honor. Everyone is to some extent holy because we were created by the Holy One himself. Over the centuries, this belief in essential human dignity was developed into a doctrine of human rights, a doctrine that many of the nations on today's planet have agreed to follow. Well, they agreed to. Whether they do that in practice or not is another matter, but our Western non-Christian worldview says we don't have to honor one another. Our Western worldview models for us every day that we can be rude to one another. From the world spirit, we learn that we can interrupt people we disagree with and call them hater. They may have never actually done anything to us, but we can say they're hateful simply because they take a different perspective than we do. We can thwart their free speech. We can objectify them as object of lust. We can treat them as mere tools to earn money for us. We can treat them like numbers. Faceless beings who have no story of their own, no life of their own, no dignity of their own. I love that old Bob Seger song, I Feel Like a Number, right? To workers, I'm just another drone. To Mobile, I'm just another phone. I'm just another statistic on a sheet. To teachers, I'm just another child. To the IRS, I'm another file. I'm just another consensus on the street. You want to see me, the you, get almost immediately flustered? Treat me like a number. Treat me like a non-person. The world spirit loves to treat us like a non-person. Alternatively, as Christ followers, as those who believe in the Bible that he believed in, we know we need to treat everyone with respect. Our knowledge is supposed to be submitted to the one we follow, and he treated those with diseases, the unclean, the poor, and the social outcasts as people deserving dignity. That's one example of reason submitted to faith. Here's a second example. Because of the Christian faith, because we follow the risen Lord, we know that in the heart of every human being there lurks evil. Jeremiah wrote, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" One of the psalmists wrote, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good." This element of constant darkness exists side by each, with the element of dignity that I just noted. It is utterly confounding that we are so beautiful and so ugly at one time. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once poignantly wrote, "The line between good and evil goes down the middle of the human heart." Or the Foo Fighters, who I've been listening to in copious amounts for over a year, and who I just saw in concert a couple nights ago. The Foo Fighters in their new album sing, "I'm a natural disaster. There's dirty water in my blood." Or Anne Boleyn, in an older album I dearly loved, once sang, "I'm impossible to figure out." Right? Why do those elected to serve the common good, politicians, so commonly use their power for greedy personal aims? The human heart is corrupted. Why do pop celebrities so commonly fall into divorce, addictions, and existential struggles? The human heart has a dark vein running through it. Why do DC government officials use their office to try to take advantage of young interns? The human core is infected by evil. Why, oh mercy me, why, across human history, have kings and tyrants and governments savagely butchered or starved to death their own people and treated them like expendable numbers? I'm sorry, but I find it simply weird that so many people believe the answer to everything is the government. Have you read history? Do you know what governments across human history have consistently done to their very own people? Why did Joseph Stalin murder 70 million of his own Slavic neighbors? How is it possible that Saddam Hussein took his political opponents and ran their living bodies through wood mulching machines? The answer? The human heart is corroded and misguided and too often willing to do anything to get ahead of others. How is it possible that a man rents a Home Depot truck and drives down a Manhattan bike lane full of pedestrians and pedalestrians? Answer? The Bible, the book that Jesus studied extensively, teaches constantly that the human heart is deceived and folded in on itself. Now I know, because I taught college full-time for 15 years, that you quite likely were taught in public school that people are essentially good. But everyday life just doesn't bear that out. I know you've been taught that people are actually good and that society is evil, but everyday reality just doesn't bear that out. I know that neo-Marxism holds that people are good, but it's just that our imperialist systems corrupt us. But living in the common reality of human existence, we know it isn't that simple. It's actually odd to me that millions of Westerners believe people are essentially good. Goodness is far less common than badness. Compassion is less common than selfishness. Aware of the needs of others is less common than everyday individual pettiness. Let me tell you a story on that point. Tanya and I love living here in Idaho. Folks here to me are, because I lived in Southern California for 34 years, people here are so uncommonly kind. But 3 weeks ago, we went to Black Friday, and we got up early and we went to Home Depot, one of my most favoritist stores. And we got up early to go buy 99-cent Christmas poinsettias. When we arrived in the dark, and it was about 5:45 in the morning, there were already 20 people in line, and it was raining. People were being respectful and chatting with one another, and from what I could tell, no one was cutting the line. But when the store doors opened, the pushing and shoving began. When I finally made it to the aisle with the poinsettias, people were plowing their carts into one another, pushing right through one another, and in general exhibiting the constant human aura of me first. It was sad. I stood in line feeling sorrow for humanity. I felt bad that there were women who were grabbing 24 pots of poinsettias when the limit was only 12. And no, the store didn't let them buy that many. 2 years ago, back in SoCal on Black Friday in Home Depot, I actually saw 2 men pushing one another over poinsettias. At this year's Black Friday, while I was waiting in line to pay, the gent behind me, turns out he was a painting contractor, he told me that last year he saw 2 men go to blows over ladders that were on sale. They were fist fighting over ladders. And those are benign examples of human behavior. We could start talking about the real honest-to-God violence that tyrants are enacting upon their nations right now, and you and I would both get sick in our stomachs. Now, you may be thinking, but Ed, I want to assume the best from people. I'm happier when I believe people are happy and kind. Well, me? I'm not trying to barge in on your own therapy. But I'll bet you find it perplexing when some supposedly nice people do particularly petty and nasty and vulgar things. I bet you have to exercise quite the force of willpower to maintain your belief that people are essentially good. So, why does this matter? Why does our knowledge being submitted to the claims of the Christian worldview matter? Well, actually, it goes to our valuation of reality. Are you landing on the truth? Are we living lives that accord with truth? Are we processing reality in a way that corresponds with our experience? Maybe you're willing to ask yourself, but does your life make more sense because of your beliefs, or is your life chaotic? Because I'm thinking it might be very chaotic and bewildering and bitterness fomenting to watch so many people do so many rude and despicable things, especially when you believe, against the claims of the Bible, that people are essentially good. Or again, just why does this matter? Well, rather significantly, because our beliefs about human nature are foundational for how we do society. What is civilization? What should it be? What is justice? What is goodness? All of those kinds of questions deal with the basic understanding of human nature. And again, I hear so much shrill shouting. I read about people calling people vile names because there's a statue in town that was erected by people who lived decades ago. Or I've personally heard from people who were present while students protested the names of college buildings, buildings that were built many decades ago by the free donations of others, as though the existence of that building is the problem on their campus. It's really quite silly. Or I watch on TV news as anarchists burn college school buildings, and I'm reminded that, for good and bad, civilization is based foundationally on what it means to be human. Who do you know that's talking about what it means to be human? Because I sure don't hear those discussions in popular media or popular culture. In arguments between political conservatives and liberals, I don't hear them talking about essential definitions of humanity. I guess it's easier. It helps them raise money to demonize the other, to simply call the other side evil, haters, racists, bigots, chauvinists, misogynists, homophobes, liars, or whatever name happens to be in vogue right now. Geez, it's so exhausting. It's silly, and really, it's just stupid. It shows how little thought we give to really digging into the meat of our problems. And our problems, almost all of them, have fundamentally to do with us. We are usually our problem. But we used to. We used to stop and think. Our forebears used to spend some leisure time doing some reflection. But now, too many today are characterized by chronological snobbery. And that's a concept I've come across in different authors. And more precisely, it's a phrase I just saw from a Faulkner University law professor named Adam McLeod. Chronological snobbery. Chronological snobbery is defined as the position where one's own time in human history is superior to all others. Now for me, no snob is a good snob. But don't be a chronological snob either. People used to get together and listen to speeches about human nature, about what kind of society is a good one, and about just what is civilization. Doesn't the very word civilization presume the word civilized? Doesn't the word civilized presume there are ways of existence that are not civilized or that are less civilized? I'm surely stealing from someone, but I'm concerned that civilization is just not so civil anymore. College education used to consist of considering and debating the most influential thinkers and ideas and poets and artists from across human history. But now, I'm terribly afraid, college education too frequently and too sadly consists of learning how to demonize people with whom we disagree. And rather than seriously engaging the other's ideas or their philosophic commitments or their worldview, we learn to call them racists or imperialists or, more childishly, haters. And then, to pile irony upon irony, many use the term othering as a means to dismiss the other. It's so ironic. Worse, it's mere indoctrination. So instead, turn your brain on. Begin making some discerning and nuanced judgments and learn how to be a critical thinker. Oh dear. I came across this one the other day. Blessed are they who can laugh at themselves, for they shall never cease to be amused. Have you laughed at yourself this week? Have you laughed at your own family this week? Have you laughed at your own group this week? Have you laughed at your own workplace this week? Laughter is such good medicine. Among its many virtues, laughter helps us not to take ourselves so blankety-blank serious. Well, thank you for listening today. In my next episode, I'm going to talk further on what does it mean to submit reason to faith. I want to suggest some careful examples of how that can and should happen, because it might sound more odd than it really is. Please, if you have questions or suggestions or comments or jokes, please send me your jokes. Contact me at uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. Please go and rate me on iTunes. It helps to increase my internet presence. And it's early. This is only my 9th podcast episode, but I'm trying to consider whether to seek out donations on Patreon. So give me some feedback. Thank you so much for listening today. And please, turn your brains on, everybody.